Tonight, on The Big Interview, Crosby, Stills and Nash, their tumultuous lives and signatures sound.
What have I got to?
I'm a journalist, obviously, and I'm always interested in getting this story straight. Can we settle on how Crosby, Stills and Nash started?
No.
There's no agreement?
No.
Three sensational singers who were there at Woodstock. Crosby, Stills and Nash on The Big Interview. They were three singers who already had successful careers. David Crosby as part of the influential 60s rock band The Byrds, Stephen Stills in Buffalo Springfield, and Graham Nash in the legendary British rock group The Hollies. But in Los Angeles, in the summer of 1968, Crosby, Stills and Nash got together for the first time, forming one of the first supergroups. And from the infectious strains of their first hit single, Marrakesh Express, it was magic.
Would you know we're riding on the Marrakesh Express? Would you know we're riding?
The harmony among the three soon became legend and inspired its own name, the California Sound. But their music quickly changed with the times. In the summer of 1968, America was in turmoil. Vietnam was raging. Anti-war sentiment was on the rise. Long Time Gone was written in response to the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Social commentary and criticism became a key element in much of the group's songwriting. By the following summer, Crosby, Stills and Nash had added Neil Young and his distinctive voice. The group played Woodstock. It was only their second live performance together, but it became a seminal moment in the history of rock and roll.
Sometimes it hurts so badly I must cry out loud.
Even though their voices blended seamlessly when they sang, offstage, one band member's voice seemed to draw the most attention. Guitarist and songwriter David Crosby.
In preparing for this interview, I was told that he's the unpredictable one. Why would they say that?
I have a reputation for being loony and irreverent and experimental. And it's, you know, I think it's a fair description. I wouldn't dispute it at all.
Well, you used the word experimental. Sometimes being experimental can get you into trouble.
It has, and sometimes it's gotten me into areas, you know, that I would not otherwise have made it to. For the human race, it's been the same way. It's been a good thing and a bad thing. For me, experimenting with drugs wound up terribly. For me, experimenting with musical forms wound up being the biggest open door that I hit in my musical growth, you know. So I think in the long run, it's a quality that the human race really needs and should nurture.
Well, let's talk about the negative side of it. You said there certainly is a positive side, the experimenting with new musical forms, but on the bad side, let's talk about the highlights or lowlights, if you will. First of all, how did it start?
Well, we were a bunch of people trying to blow ourselves loose from the 50s, from Pat Boone and White Bucks, you know, from Father Knows Best. That was an age we wanted to leave behind, and maybe rightly so. So when the idea of smoking a joint, you know, came along, we thought, wow, this is pretty wonderful. And we embraced it. We thought, wow, it's just gonna give us all kinds of wild new ideas. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't, maybe the ideas would have come anyway, but we loved it. Then we encountered hard drugs, which of course, as you know, although the government doesn't seem to know it, are completely different, pure poison. And they pretty much destroyed my life over a period of time, or I destroyed my life with their help. And that's where experimenting can get you in a lot of trouble. That's like experimenting when you're trying to climb up Half Dome without a rope. Not a good place to be.
Well, I'm smiling, but it wasn't funny at the time.
No, it wasn't funny at all.
was
I wound
serious.
up in a Texas prison. How funny could it be?
And you were in prison for how long?
A year.
Was that the low point?
Yeah. You know, it's low point and high point. I wrote that judge who put me in that prison a thank you letter later on. And I said, I know that every day people show up in front of your court that you've seen before and that you've given a sentence to. And he wasn't a mean guy or anything. He was a guy trying to do a good job. And I said, this one time I wanted you to know it worked. I'm married. I'm working. I'm sober. I'm being tested sober. I'm going to AA. I'm happy. My life's working. The whole thing actually worked the way it was supposed to. And I just thought it might help you if you knew that every once in a while you win one.
If you hadn't gone to prison, if the judge hadn't sentenced you to prison, do you think you'd be alive today?
No. I can say that with almost absolute certainty. I would not have.
So in that sense, going to prison saved your life.
I think it did.
I'm a great believer you are what your record is, and your record shows that you did straighten up and you did become, did you ever, a productive member of society. What turned it around for you and when?
I think one of the biggest factors was my wife, Jan. You know, we went downhill together, and when I gave myself up, I surrendered myself to the authorities and willingly went to prison. She went into treatment. When I got out, we got together, and I think a lot of it was her support and her saying, let's go to a meeting, and finding, you know, other things of value to put our time and effort into rather than trying to find more drugs.
You've been married how long?
36 years. And I think we're incredibly lucky that we're still together, because I would not be alive if she hadn't been there to help me through it.
In music, as in almost every other field, it's very difficult to sustain a career anywhere near as long as you and the others have been able to sustain your careers.
I can tell you why I think that is. Whether it's Crosby, Stills and Nash with 3 writers or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young with 4 writers, we had a wide palette, much wider palette to paint from than most bands would have. And all 4 of us can sing lead, all 4 of us can sing harmony, all 4 of us can play. And I think the songs are really the defining meat of the matter. Without songs that are about something and that make you feel something, if I can't sit down and sing you a song and make you feel something, I don't think I really have a song. And I think that's been our strength. We've lasted 40 years. There has to be something, and it's certainly not our looks.
Well, you've never been afraid, and indeed you seem to have been eager from almost the very start to mix political activism with music. And to those who say, that's not the role of a musician, they should make their music, make good sound, and in quotation marks, I can get behind that, but when they start getting politically active, that's when I get off the bus, unquote. To them, you say what?
You know, there's an awful lot of people who feel that way. I remember when we played in Atlanta the last tour that we did with CSNY, and Neil had a song called Let's Impeach the President for Lying, which the president most assuredly did do. A third of the audience walked out. And we're talking one of these big blimp hangar-sized buildings. It was a lot of people.
Let's impeach the president for lying. Let's impeach the president for hijacking our religion.
I think that we have as much right to stand for what we believe in as you do, as you have, as you did, in a very exemplary fashion for many years.
Thank you.
Compliment
Thank you.
intended. I think everybody does. I understand that we have more reach. We can spread word further than the guy driving the bus. But that doesn't deprive us of the right to stick up for what we believe in. I think it gives us a greater responsibility to, you know, express it carefully and in a prepared and in an intelligent way rather than just ranting rhetoric. But I think we have every right to. And I'm more than willing, as you have always been, to accept the responsibility and take the job seriously and try to make sure I get it right and do it right.
There must be voices, or tell me if they aren't, managers or promoters who say, listen, could you stay away from that controversial stuff because we don't want a third of the audience walking out on us. It's bad for business.
Yes. There are and have been people who said that to us. They no longer manage us or are our agents. The people that we work with understand who we are. They give us an interview like this instead of one where somebody says, well, what's your favorite color? Or do you date blondes? You're not going to ask me that. You're going to ask me things that will test me to come up with a cogent, lucid answer.
Then I'm going to try to put you to the test.
Please do.
With your legendary musical past, really have reached icon level. That's a compliment to you, but it's one, not that I give you, it's one that you've earned. But at this age and stage, who are you and what are you?
Grateful. I am a very grateful man. You come very close to death. It's a very educational experience. I came very close. And it teaches you to treasure what you've got, every breath you take, I'm starting to quote Sting, that's not good. Every bone you break. It teaches you to treasure it, and I do. I am a very happy guy. I've had a tremendous amount of luck. I mean, according to the odds, I shouldn't be here. I have 3 fatal diseases, none of which they have a cure for.
And those are?
Hepatitis C, heart disease. I've got 5 stents in my heart, and diabetes, which is really a tough one. It's a disease of paying attention, and paying attention is sort of an adult quality. I'm not sure I really still qualify as an adult. Still trying, but...
You're still pretty young by my standards.
I feel good. I try very hard to stay alive. I go to a gym, I work out, I read constantly. I'm still trying to grow. I would like to be learning something new and growing the day that I die.
Will you come see me?
Stephen Stills is considered the musical heart of Crosby, Stills and Nash. A virtuoso at a variety of instruments, he was named by Rolling Stone as one of the greatest guitarists of all time. He is also a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame, penning such iconic tunes as For What It's Worth, while part of Buffalo Springfield.
Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. You make it hard.
Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, about his then girlfriend, folk singer Judy Collins, and Love the One You're With, just to name a few. But the life of Stephen Stills has not been just about accolades. It's had its share of low notes as well.
The end of my enjoyment of my success happened on December 8th, 1980. And I believe I poured myself into a bottle of whiskey for about 10 years and pretty much missed the 80s. I mean, the trauma of John Lennon being shot in such a ridiculous fashion just took a great deal of the pleasure out of it for me. And now the whole nation is armed. I think I'm well within a certain sense of tranquility to keep to myself. I just, there are those that really crave the spotlight, besides, other than just singing or playing. I like the stage, but the spotlight following them around and all this thing of this modern age is just, it drives me to distraction, I must say.
Well, and it's well known that you seldom do interviews, and you don't particularly like to do interviews.
No, I can get downright rude. particularly when the questions are so banal that it's just like, why are we talking about this? Sex, drugs, rock and roll, it's such a cliche, you know?
Well, what question do you think should be asked that doesn't get asked very often, if at all?
What motivates you? Do you sense or do you think about overly the impact on society that these might have? Do you understand the difference between a clever tune and sloganeering? And I'd say we'd cross that line a few times, but I don't want to be a propagandist. That's why For What It's Worth is so enigmatic. It doesn't really come down on either side. It's about being mistreated by the police at home, and it also was a little message and a shout out to the boys over in the NAM who were trying to just get through the day.
There's a man with a gun over
For What It's Worth doesn't even use its title phrase in the lyrics. The song is much more easily recognized by its catchy hook.
Time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Written by Stills while part of the short-lived rock group Buffalo Springfield, the song became an anthem of the 1960s and was quickly adopted as a protest song in the struggle for civil rights.
What inspired you to write then?
I came up over a hill in Los Angeles and went down Laurel Canyon, and they were having a funeral for a bar. Now this place had been just a little bungalow in the middle of a sort of triangular block, but it had of course spilled over into the thoroughfare. And that under LA, Los Angeles City ordinance is a public nuisance, you're obstructing a public thoroughfare. It was
Well, that's what, I want to get the picture here. This was a big party, if you will.
Yeah,
it wasn't a protest movement.
It was a funeral for a bar.
A funeral for a bar.
Now, being from New Orleans, that's a very natural event. If there's a favorite watering hole and it's about to close down, then everybody comes to say goodbye to it.
And that's what this was, but it was overflowing into the streets.
It's called Pandora's Box, and it was a little place that would have live music. It used to be a house, so there was.
So the funeral for the bar was spilling into the streets.
So the cops show up in battalion force.
And that's what prompted the writing of
Yeah.
For What It's Worth.
Yeah, and although the first line, there's a man with a gun over there telling me I've got to beware, is both those policemen and it's the VC over when you're on patrol in Rice Paddy.
Now, did you write this down in a notebook or a piece of paper, or are you just keeping it in your head?
I've been fiddling with this line for several days, and I looked at this, and first thing is, my sense of security said, turn the car around and go the other way, and because that's more trouble than we want any part of. And the other reason for saying turn the car around is I wanted to get to a guitar right then because the thing was there. And it took me no longer to write it than it took me to actually write the sentences on the paper. It was writing itself on the way home.
Well, it's no secret that you suffer hearing loss. Millions of people in this country, including myself, have hearing loss at one stage or another. And I think it might be inspirational for those of us who do suffer hearing loss to hear you talk about it a bit.
Well, the first thing I would say is that contrary to popular or convenient logic, that standing in front of that big old lamp fire is what done it. But actually, I remember at least half of my relatives were, from both sides of the pen, there was hearing loss and congenital hearing loss and damage within the family.
Oh, so you don't buy the idea that it's entirely because of rock and roll and listening to such loud music all this time.
My hearing deficiency was discovered by, here's socialized medicine for you, Huey P. Long, when he's governor of Louisiana. He got himself a trailer and he put a doctor's office in it, and he sent it to every elementary school in the state of Louisiana, every parish. Right. And it happened by mine when I was 9 years old. And they said, you have a hearing loss and it's going to get worse. It's right in the speaking range.
When you were 9 years old?
Yeah. So I am now, I am at the it's going to get worse part. As a matter of fact, well past the It's going to get, I'm profoundly deaf in this year, and about, I'd say I've got about a 30% loss on this side.
Now, do you or do you not worry that that may affect your ability to sing? After all, your voice depends greatly on your hearing.
Well, only if you're working with bat ears, which is what I call David Crosby, because he will notice if I slip even a millimeter out of tune. Of course, I will too when I hear the recording later, but it doesn't appear to me now, and I've got this nice vibrato that I cover it up with. But what's really irritating to me now is that it's gotten so bad that I've got to be in a pretty close reflective room to be able to hear my acoustic guitar. But the other thing is that this is not specific to musicians. This is a nationwide thing because of just the noise of life in America, cars and trucks and sirens and horns honking and trains and just, all the whistle and bells of modern day life. There is a general hearing loss that's becoming more and more pronounced. And the equipment that they're building to address this malady is, I would call it barbaric in its simplicity. It's just a little bitty microphone with a couple of amplifiers in it, and it's woefully inadequate to the job because the human body can hear from anywhere from 25,000 cycles up where dogs can hear all the way down to about 60, but the frequencies, they actually harmonize with each other in order to produce a whole experience that's neurological and physiological and also spiritual. That's what music does.
Indeed. Well, you've written so many songs and great songs, but
I've written good songs. I've written some albatrosses, those things that just follow you around, and about the 1,000th performance, you realize how absurd it is. If you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. You want to slap yourself.
If you can't be with the one you love, honey, love the one you're with, and you got to love the one you're with.
Stills picked up the phrase from fellow musician Billy Preston, who gave his blessing for Stills to use it. Love the One You're With was the most successful of Stills' solo career and has become part of the Crosby, Stills and Nash repertoire.
I want to ask you about your colleagues of so long. At bass, who is David Crosby?
He is one of the most wonderful and just delightfully surreal people that I've met in my life, and wonderfully articulate. And only since I've lost my hearing and he grew that mustache and it's gotten all white, I can't understand half of what he says. And he's very soft-spoken. He's provided me with endless hours of, fall on the floor belly laughs.
And how about your friend Graham Nash? Who is he?
I do not consider myself qualified to define, but I would say that I learned an awful lot about craftsmanship and about attentiveness and about passion and about tenacity from him. And he's just a lovely, generous, wonderful, beautiful guy. What a blessing, both of them.
What a blessing indeed. We're near the end here. What question have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
I can't think of a thing. I think you've done a marvelous job of discerning what we're about, because it's not so much that we're going to change the world. We want to convince everybody that it's possible, and we're about the joy of making a wonderful noise together.
Looking at the world through the sunset in your eye.
The third voice in Crosby, Stills and Nash is that of Graham Nash, whose path to American rock and roll stardom began in a small town in England.
American ladies 5 foot tall.
Well, tell me, how does a British young man become part of a group that's so synonymous with American culture?
American rock and roll music. When I first heard Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers and Elvis and Fats Domino and Jerry Lee Lewis, my life was over. I knew what I wanted to do. The Beatles were successful, of course, and they opened up giant, enormous doors that every single band wanted to run through. You know, when they first had their hit record and conquered America, that's what we wanted to do.
Well, the Hollies were a tremendously successful British band. What was it like when you first played in the U.S.?
We thought that we were going to do our 45 minutes of dynamite. You know, we got to the Paramount in Times Square in New York City in Easter of 1965 on the Soupy Sales Easter show. And the stage manager says, okay, what 2 songs are you doing? 2 songs? We came all this way to do 2 songs? Yeah, but it's six times a day. And there's 12 other people on the same act, you know. So it was very strange. We had to let go. We thought we knew what we were doing in our English way, but when we came to America, we had to let go. I don't know whether you remember in Times Square, there was that camel high up that blew smoke rings. Right. That was fantastic to a kid from Manchester. I'd never seen anything like that in my life, right? A real hamburger, people that would deliver food to you. This was paradise. Oh yeah, no, I knew where I wanted to be the moment I set foot in America. I climbed up the nearest palm tree when I went to Los Angeles, and I told Alan Clark I was never going back.
Alan Clark and Graham Nash were longtime childhood friends when they started the Hollies. Named after Buddy Holly, the group had a long string of hits on both sides of the Atlantic, including the 1966 single Bus Stop. But eventually, Nash was ready to sing a different tune.
Well, why did you leave?
The music. I had heard me and David and Stephen sing. It was completely a unique sound to me. You know, the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield and the Hollies were very decent harmony bands. But this was something different. When David and Stephen and I put our voices and blended them together before they hit the microphone, we knew that it was something very, very unique and very different. So it's the power of that vocal blend that we got to within 40 seconds of singing with each other. 40 seconds.
Incredible is that?
Yeah, yeah. Nobody sounds like us when we're on it. Nobody in the world.
Well, in your autobiography, you said the unique sound that we make is like the pull of gravity to the center of the earth.
Yes. That's how important music is to me. I think music is incredibly important in people's lives. That's why it saddens me that, you know, many school budgets, the first thing that they cut is the music program. You know, when it's proven that kids learn more, get into less trouble, get into fewer gangs, you know, stay in school longer if there's music in the schools.
You're absolutely convinced that music is an essential element of education.
And of communication between people, yes. Somebody asked me a question last night. I was doing a book signing, and somebody said, would you have made more music, or would you have made better music had you been straight all these years? Obviously, in my autobiography, I go into great detail about our drug use, because there's no denying what happened. You know, we were high for most of our lives at that point. And so there's no real answer to that question, because we'll never know.
When did the drug use start? Did you start with marijuana?
Yes.
Yes. And about when did that start?
For me, mid-'68, when I first came to Laurel Canyon. And we had a dear friend, Cass Elliot, who was the singer with the Mamas and Papas. And she was the woman that changed my life completely. She was the one that introduced me to Crosby, who would then, of course, introduce me to Stills, and then, of course, Neil. Cass Elliot was a very interesting person in rock and roll. She was very much like Gertrude Stein. She would gather people together from different disciplines to talk about what's going on in their lives, how can we make this better. She was a real firecracker, Cass. And had I not met her, my entire life would have been completely different.
So you say, you think mid-'68 is
Yes.
when you started smoking dope.
You're right.
And that led to harder stuff?
It led to cocaine. I've never tried heroin. I don't ever want to. It doesn't make sense to me that you would be able to take a drug that could kill you instantly. I never thought that we would die smoking dope. I never thought that we would die snorting cocaine, actually. One of the most disturbing parts of putting my life down in the book was how how people would perceive Crosby. The only time I ever got a call from the legal department of the publishing was of a story I told about David, who actually sold his Mercedes for cocaine, and the dealer died. And David stole into the house while the dealer was still dead and stole his pink slip bat for the Mercedes and then resold the car for more cocaine.
Well, I can imagine that the book publishers' lawyers would be all over that.
They were all over that. But I told Crosby, and I said, this is what I'm saying because that's what you told me happened. And he said, don't change a word. He admitted it. He was a man about, you know, his drug use.
I'm thinking about how few people would have taken that attitude. It tells you a lot about David Crosby.
It tells you a lot about David, yeah. David Crosby is one of the most unique people I know, and I know a lot of people. He's an unbelievably unique, rare musician. He's very jazz influenced. Strange chords, strange tunings, things I personally would, as a writer, would never think of, you know. He's a very smart man, David Crosby. And at a point in my life when I was leaving the Hollies and they were allowing me to doubt myself as an artist, that maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, or I don't know what I'm doing, or, you know, that kind of strange thing that keeps you awake at night. When I was going through that with the Hollies, it was Crosby that was saying, no, that Marrakesh Express, no, that's a good song. No, come on, come over here, come on, let's go. You know, so he gave back my faith in myself, and that's invaluable. What is the price of that?
Stephen Stills, who is he?
Stephen Stills is a leader. Stephen Stills is a tremendous, tremendous musician, a great arranger, stubborn, won't quit until he thinks it's right.
Well, that brings us to the question, who and what are you?
There's a part of me that is still waiting to get found out. I'm 71 years old now. I've been doing this successfully a long time. But there's a part of my soul that doesn't quite believe that I should be here. You know, I'm this poor kid from the north of England who had the wisdom to follow his parents' advice about following his heart in my passion for music. Who am I? I want to get the job done. If we're going to commit to doing a tour or commit to doing an album or commit to singing a note, I want to get the job done the best way we can. I personally think that time and our family are all we have. When my father died at 46 and the clouds didn't stop scurrying across the sky and the birds didn't stop singing, and I realized, my God, you have to fill your life with the best you can for every second of your life. I'll never make it 100%, but I'm certainly trying to have the best life I can, because why not?
Well, why not? I like the question.
Yeah.
You've written some very memorable songs. We won't go through the whole list, but Our House, Teach Your Children, Chicago, Wasted on the Way. What are some of the stories behind these songs?
There's a story behind every single one of them. And what I like to do is celebrate the ordinary moments in life. And I'll give you an example. I took Joni Mitchell to breakfast once in Los Angeles. We left the restaurant, we pass an antique store. She looks in the window, she sees a beautiful vase in the window that she wants to buy. Now, I mean, I know I haven't been with Joan for, you know, over 40 years, but she probably still has her first dollar. She doesn't spend a lot of money on herself, but she did buy this vase. And so we went back to her house in Laurel Canyon where we were living, and I said, you know something? I'll light a fire. Why don't you put some flowers in that vase that you just... And all of a sudden...
I'll light the fire. You place the flowers in the vase that you bought today.
That incredibly ordinary moment that you and I as men have experienced 1,000 times. You know, okay, love, you do that and I'll do this, and then tea will, you know, dinner will happen and the kids will be fine. You know, that's a perfect example. Because when Joni was in the garden trying to find flowers for the vase, she wasn't at her piano, which means I was. And Our House was written incredibly quickly.
Our house is a very, very, very fine house with 2 cats in the yard.
What an interesting concept about writing. You say you like to write about the ordinary moment.
My life is made up of ordinary moments.
Well, most everybody's life is.
Indeed.
And that's the point. But as I listen to you, I'm reminded, and you're very much aware of this, that there are a number of people who say, listen, I love Crosby, Stills, and Nash. They're great musicians, I love it, but I hate it when they start talking, quote, politics. How do you feel about that?
I can't separate my music from my politics. And I'm not so sure that politics is the right title. When you shoot 4 kids down at Kent Strait because of their constitutional right to protest what their government is doing in their name, and you kill them, is that politics or is that humanity?
The guardsmen have fired 61 shots. 4 students are dead.
Neil Young wrote the powerful Ohio in 1970 after seeing the iconic photographs of Vietnam War protesters shot dead by National Guardsmen on the Kent State campus. The song captured the mood of a divided nation and quickly became a sharp rallying cry against the war.
Is that on your list of most important songs you've been associated with or not?
Yes, very much so. It was such a wound in the national soul. We're killing our own children. Something's terribly wrong here. We had a single of Teach Your Children going up the charts. It was in the top 20, going to the top 5. We killed our own single because we thought that Ohio was more important to talk about than having a hit single.
What question have I not asked you I should have asked you?
How am I feeling?
Well, how are you feeling?
Fantastic.
Please be gone, I'm tired of you. What have you got to lose?
Few bands have been launched with the fanfare of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Woodstock was their coming out party. They even recorded a song, penned by Joni Mitchell, about the famed music festival. For many, it became the definitive song of a legendary weekend.
As I was preparing for this interview and talking to someone, this was a person roughly my age. Keep in mind, I'm now 82 years old. I said, I'm going out to talk to Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He said, oh, those hippie guys. Well, now going back to the beginning, were you hippies?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I wasn't.
Yeah.
we were.
I'll admit it, absolutely. But you know, those hippie ideals, you know, the so-called hippie ideals still remain true to this day. That love is better than hatred. That peace is better than war. That maybe we should take care of each other, like be our brother's keeper. Maybe we should take care of our environment. You know, those hippie ideals are still incredibly important today. So I'll admit to being a hippie, and I still am.
I think we started out even before that with, you know, Kerouac and the Beats. That generation of thinking influenced us, and I think gave birth to the hippies.
Did you read Jack Kerouac?
Oh yeah.
Did you read him, Stephen?
Yeah, I read him when I was in the French Quarter.
He and
So
Allen Ginsberg.
Bohemian
and
is pretty much the way I describe it. The hippies are an extension of the Bohemians.
Well, I'm a journalist, obviously, and I'm always interested in getting this story straight. Can we settle on how Crosby, Stills, and Nash started?
No.
There's no agreement.
No.
Well, let's start
this way.
Let's start with you. What's your version of how it all started?
Okay. You know how the mind memory works, and there are some events that impact you so extremely that you have a cinematographic, smellophonic, you know, absolutely high definition picture memory. And I remember looking past Cass Elliot and this guy. He was standing over here, Cass was standing at her door,
Graham.
looking past at him and said, oh my God, it's Graham Nash from the other night. And that's the day that I think that we first sang at her dining room table.
Now, Graham, does that match your memory?
Absolutely not.
No.
Well, what's your version of this story?
My version is that I came from London to visit Joni in Los Angeles.
Joni Mitchell.
Went to her house. David and Stephen were there at dinner. That's when we first sang together. And Stephen is correct in that it was such an incredibly profound musical moment in all of our lives that we will never forget the first time. But on my autobiography that we were talking about earlier, the last sentence is, "This is how I remember it." Because we all have our truths. Obviously, Stephen and David and I completely disagree about when we first sang together. But that's the fragility of the human spirit. We all have our own truths.
So David, now what's your version of where it all came together?
What he said.
You agree with Graham?
Yeah. Oh, there's no question about it. I remember it distinctly.
Well, there is some question because Stephen
Because
has different memories.
I absolutely remember this as vividly as with this moment that we're sitting here, as vividly as where I was when Jack Kennedy was killed, because that's how special the music was. It was a rosewood dining table in Cass Elliott's kitchen, and there, 2 days later we went to Joni's, where she lived in a lovely little bungalow in Wonderland Avenue, and we sang around her table with ladderback chairs.
Well,
so I remember both instances. I just there's, you know, like
I'll
I said,
give you an example of his
everyone.
memory. He thinks it was Wonderland. It was Lookout Mountain Drive. So
Well, in my story, I guess what I'm going to have to say is there are differences of opinion
yes,
as to when and how the first meeting happened.
but we all knew that it was good, and that's the main thing.
That is the main thing. So let's concentrate on that for the moment. For the moment, set aside where it happened, whether it happened in
Right.
Mama Cass's place or Joni Mitchell's place. What happened, Stephen?
He says he did, but I said, Cass, why don't you and David sing those things that you've been working on? So we went to the table, and I picked a corner so that I could really hear the two of them. David sat on this side, and the other side, he roamed around and listened to us sing this very simple song that has one verse, twice, 3 times.
And the song was?
In the morning when you rise.
In the morning when you rise.
The official title of the song was You Don't Have to Cry. The lush harmony became the signature sound for their landmark debut album.
It was a startling moment. Graham, we sang it to him. He said, "Would you do that again?" And we looked at each other and thought, well, okay. So we sang it again. He said, one more time. And we sang it, and he put the top part on, and that was, I knew at that moment what I was going to be doing with my life for quite some time.
In the morning when you rise.
It was like a horse with 3 heads and galloping on the 4 legs of my finger picking.
Did you know at that moment what you were going to be doing the rest
I
of your
know
life?
that I'd never heard a vocal group sound like that ever. I mean, the Celtic keen of his voice, his cat's purr, and my cement truck or whatever it is, just had this blesh that
That's
was-
blend and mesh.
that was, we could do anything.
It was absolutely, completely a unique sound. It was one voice made up of 3 individual strains of voice. There was no doubt. We knew what we had. We were in love with each other. We were in love with the music. We were in love with each other's songs. We couldn't wait to get out there. Get out of our way. We're coming forward.
So much love to make up everywhere you turn. Love we have wasted on the way. So much.
So now you come together. Now you're Crosby, Stills, and Nash. What happened after that? You realize you've had this incredible moment.
We kept it very much to ourselves for quite some time, trying to navigate all the very delicate business negotiation to get releases and things like that.
We were on 3 separate record companies.
Yes, and so we had to play this whole little game. The minute that we got that done, we went into a very quiet studio and did not tell anybody, because one of the most disruptive influences on a recording session is an entourage showing up. So we went into the studio very quietly, and we had sung these songs to death. And it just happened like that.
You have to understand that Stephen played just about everything on that first record except the drums. He played lead, he played acoustic, he played bass, and he played.
B3 piano.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, B3
Crosby and I
piano.
played our guitars on, Long Time Gone and Guinevere and Lady of the Island and, stuff like that. But Stephen played most of the instruments. So when we had created this album, when we realized we're going to have to go out and play live, what do we do with the men that played all the instruments? It doesn't work.
So what did you do?
We turned to a member of his former group, Neil. And I think there was a lot of question in our minds whether or not we wanted Neil in the band. And I remember.
Was there a question in his mind whether Neil Young wanted to be in the band?
Yeah, there was. But he knew what we had too. Neil's brilliant. I came to my decision point about it. I was sitting in the driveway of that same house, Joni's house on Lookout. And Neil drove by and he saw me sitting there. And he turned around, came back down, pulled out a guitar, we sat on the trunk of the car, and he sang me, I don't know, 4 of the best songs I'd ever heard in a row. And I said, oh yeah, I want this guy in the band.
Well, I'd never met Neil Young. I didn't know whether we could be friends. I didn't know whether I could tell him secrets. I didn't know whether we could hang. I had never met him. So I said to David and Stephen, look, before we make this incredible decision, I have to meet this Neil Young guy. I went to breakfast with Neil on Bleecker Street in the Village, and after that breakfast, I would have made him king of the world. He was so funny. He was so self-assured. He was so certain that what he could bring, especially his ability to play guitar in and against Stephen, would be brilliant.
Neil is, a very unusual human being. He will do what he thinks is going to produce the best music. If he believes that it's time for the 4 of us to play, then he will come to that party and he will make that happen. When we started this, just to make one thing clear, we planned, the reason we used our own names instead of calling ourselves the Jetsons or Led Zeppelin or, the Giant Banana Centipede, we used our own names because we intended to be able to work in any combination, and all of us had in mind doing solo stuff. All of us, Graham and I, have always had a special relationship. We always intended to do Crosby Nash, and it's been a gift from God. It's been so good.
Well, if someone arrived and didn't know anything about your past, anything about your music, and said, what is your music about? How would you answer that question?
Everything.
Humanity, feelings, love, friendship, loyalty, support.
Justice.
Less crazy, less lonely. Maybe challenge you to think a little differently about things.
Diminishing the space between human beings.
It's about here.
The musician's joke, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.
My
Thank
pleasure.
You.
Thank you so much.
Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you, my
it.
friend. And that's the big interview for tonight. We're always eager to hear what you have to say, so please follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or send your comments to viewer@access.tv.